During my wedding rehearsal at the Drake Hotel, as the string quartet tuned their instruments and ivory roses framed the aisle, my mother leaned in close enough that her perfume drowned out the lilies. She adjusted my veil like she was fixing a flaw and whispered, "You're still the disappointment. Not congratulations. Not you look beautiful. Just that." Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Savannah Calloway, and for 32 years I tried to earn love that was always conditional. My older brother, Rhett Calloway, was the golden child, varsity quarterback, business school graduate, the heir apparent to Calloway & Sons Construction back in Dayton, Ohio. I was the risk. The artsy one. The daughter who moved to Chicago and built something of her own instead of orbiting the family business. After our father passed, I offered to help modernize the company. My degree in sustainable architecture and my years in commercial development didn't matter. My mother, Darlene Calloway, chose Rhett without hesitation. And he nearly destroyed everything. What she didn't know as she whispered those words at my rehearsal was that 3 days earlier, I had signed documents that legally changed the future of Calloway & Sons. By the time I walked down that aisle to marry Gideon Thorne, I already owned the one thing she loved more than either of her children. The building that carried our family name. And Monday morning, they were going to find out. While my mother was still replaying the rehearsal in her mind and Rhett was probably nursing a hangover from his own overconfident toast, an overnight envelope was already sitting in the Dayton office of Calloway & Sons Construction. Inside was the notice. Loan default confirmed. Debt acquired. Property ownership transferred. To Calloway Holdings LLC. Rhett had been warned for 2 years. The Columbus luxury condo project he insisted on spearheading had bled money from the start. He ignored supply chain delays. He ignored contractor disputes. He ignored me. When I'd flown home 18 months earlier and asked to see the numbers, he laughed. "You don't understand real business, Sarah. You design pretty buildings. I build them." Except he wasn't building anything. He was gambling. After Dad passed, my mother handed Rhett operational control without hesitation. She said stability mattered. She said clients trusted him. She said I was too independent to work under family authority. But independence teaches you something golden children never learn: how to survive without applause. Back in Chicago, Gideon and I had quietly grown Thorne and Vale Developments into a respected mid-sized firm. We revitalized struggling commercial spaces. We studied distressed assets. We knew how to read warning signs. And Calloway & Sons was flashing red. When I discovered the company had leveraged the headquarters building as collateral, I knew exactly how exposed they were. That brick building on Mercer Street wasn't just real estate. It was my mother's altar. So when the bank started preparing for foreclosure proceedings, I stepped in, not as a daughter. As an investor. I didn't warn them again. I didn't argue. I just positioned myself to own the outcome. By the time I said I do at my wedding, the paperwork was complete. And the reckoning was already scheduled. Gideon and I were 3 days into our honeymoon on the rocky coast of Maine when my phone started vibrating across the nightstand. 17 missed calls. All from Dayton. I stared at the screen while waves crashed outside our rental cottage. "Are you going to answer?" Gideon asked carefully. I already knew what this was. When I finally picked up, my mother didn't say hello. "What did you do, Serafina?" No warmth. No wedding wishes. Just accusation. In the background, I could hear Rhett's voice, loud, panicked, furious. The bank's notice had arrived that morning. Their primary commercial loan had officially defaulted. The debt had been purchased. Ownership of the Mercer Street headquarters had transferred. "You can't just take your father's building," she snapped. "I didn't take it," I said evenly. "The bank sold the debt. I bought it." Silence. Because legally, there was nothing they could argue. Rhett grabbed the phone. "You set this up. You waited for us to fail." "No," I corrected him. "I waited for you to listen." He had ignored every warning. Vendors were threatening liens. Payroll had been delayed twice. The Columbus project was months behind and over budget by millions. "You humiliated us," he hissed. "No," I replied. "You did that yourself." My mother came back on the line, her voice smaller now. "Why would you do this to your own family?" That question hit differently. Because she still believed I wasn't part of it. "I sent an email," I said calmly. There will be a board meeting next Friday.
I'll be there.
We'll discuss terms.
Terms, she whispered. Yes.
If the company wants to stay in that building, it will operate differently.
I hung up before she could respond. For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging to be included. I was setting conditions.
The following Friday, I walked into the Mercer Street headquarters for the first time in 2 years. The red brick facade looked smaller than I remembered.
Less like a fortress. More like a liability.
The conference room still had my father's framed blueprint sketches on the wall. Rhett was pacing at the far end of the table. My mother sat rigid, hands folded too tightly in her lap. Every board member was present. For the first time in my life, no one looked past me.
Rhett started before I even sat down. This is hostile.
You went behind our backs and bought the debt like some corporate raider.
I placed a folder in front of each board member. Calm. Structured. Prepared. It's not hostile, I replied. It's corrective.
Inside the folder were audited financial summaries I had compiled from public filings and vendor disclosures. Revenue had dropped 38% in 18 months. The Columbus development was hemorrhaging capital. 3 subcontractors were preparing legal action. One board member, Alton Pierce, cleared his throat.
Is this accurate? No one answered. Because it was. My mother finally spoke.
Serafina, you've made your point. What do you want?
Not revenge. Control.
I'm offering restructuring under my firm, Thorn and Vale Developments.
We absorb operational management. We renegotiate vendor contracts. We stabilize debt. The Callaway name stays.
The employees keep their jobs.
Rhett slammed his palm on the table.
You think you can just take over?
I already own the building, I said quietly.
If Callaway and Sons defaults on occupancy, the company will be evicted within 60 days.
The room went still. I wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore. I was the leverage.
The board requested a private deliberation.
As they stepped out, my mother didn't look at me.
For the first time, she looked unsure.
And that uncertainty? It was the beginning of everything shifting. And that uncertainty?
It was the beginning of everything shifting. The board filed back into the conference room 27 minutes later. I counted every second by the slow tick of the old brass clock my father had mounted on the wall 20 years ago. Rhett stood straight, jaw tight, confidence forced.
He still believed loyalty would outweigh numbers. Alton Pierce spoke first. We've reviewed the financial exposure.
The company cannot survive another quarter under its current structure.
Rhett cut in.
That's dramatic.
It's math, another board member replied. Then came the vote. 5 in favor of restructuring under my oversight. 2 opposed. Rhett was one of the 2. It passed. Just like that, the illusion shattered. My mother inhaled sharply but didn't argue. For years she had treated Callaway and Sons like a crown to hand down to her chosen heir. Now the board had chosen someone else. Me. This is a mistake, Rhett muttered.
She's doing this to humiliate us. I didn't flinch. I'm doing this to prevent liquidation. The restructuring terms were clear. Thorn and Vale would assume operational leadership. Existing management decisions would be reviewed. Financial transparency would become mandatory. Pending lawsuits would be settled or renegotiated. And Rhett? He would no longer have unilateral authority. After the meeting adjourned, employees gathered outside the glass walls, whispering. They weren't angry. They were relieved. That hurt Rhett more than anything. As I gathered my documents, my mother finally spoke. You've been planning this for a long time. Yes, I said. How long? Since the first time you told me I didn't belong in this building. Her silence followed me down the hallway. But this wasn't finished. Because power shifts on paper first. Then it shifts in blood. And Rhett wasn't done fighting. 2 days after the vote, he called an emergency staff meeting without informing me. By the time I heard about it, he was already standing in the warehouse bay, rallying employees like a cornered general. She's not here because she doesn't care about this company, he told them. She wants to turn us into some Chicago experiment. One of the project managers recorded it and sent it to me privately. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Instead of confronting him publicly, I drove back to Dayton that evening and requested a private conversation in Dad's old office. The same room where I'd once been told to leave business to the men. Rhett didn't sit. You're tearing this family apart, he said. No, I replied. Your pride is.
He laughed bitterly.
You always needed to prove something.
Yes, I said.
Because no one ever handed me anything.
That hit.
For a second, I saw something beneath his arrogance. Fear. If he wasn't the Golden Son, who was he? I can still block this, he threatened. There are investors who trust me. You mean the ones preparing lawsuits?
I asked calmly.
I've already spoken to them. His face drained of color. Because while he was trying to save his ego, I was saving the payroll of 46 employees who depended on this company.
I'm offering you a role, I added. Stay. Learn.
Work within the new structure.
An answer to you, he scoffed.
Yes.
That was the part he couldn't swallow.
As I left, he said something that almost stopped me. She'll never choose you.
He meant Mom.
Maybe he was right.
But this wasn't about being chosen anymore. It was about being undeniable.
And that realization changed the game completely. 3 nights later, my mother asked me to come over to the house I grew up in, the colonial on Briarwood Lane with the white shutters my father repainted every spring. I hadn't stepped inside since before my wedding. She didn't offer coffee. She didn't offer warmth. She stood by the kitchen island like we were strangers negotiating a contract. I never thought you'd go this far, she said quietly. I never thought you'd push me this far, I replied. She flinched, but not dramatically. Just enough. For years, she'd praised Rhett for showing up. For carrying the Callaway name. Meanwhile, I built a company from scratch in Chicago with Gideon. Long nights, rejected bids, near bankruptcy in year 2.
No family bailout. No applause.
You embarrassed your brother, she said. He embarrassed himself, I answered. That's when her voice shifted. You've always been so difficult, Serafina. Independent. Unwilling to fall in line.
There it was. The real crime. I wasn't disloyal.
I was uncontrollable.
I wanted you safe, she added. Rhett fit the plan.
You didn't. I let that sit between us.
I didn't need to fit the plan, I said softly.
I needed you to believe I was capable.
She didn't deny it. Instead, she asked the question I knew was coming.
If your father were alive, would you have done this? I looked around the kitchen, at the worn oak table, the faded graduation photo where Rhett stood front and center while I was half-cropped on the edge. Yes, I said. Because he built something strong. And I refused to let it collapse just to protect your narrative.
She didn't argue.
She just nodded once.
But silence can be heavier than insults.
And hers told me something I hadn't expected.
She was starting to understand. But Rhett wasn't.
The next week, everything unraveled faster than I expected. One of the subcontractors officially filed a claim over unpaid invoices from the Columbus project. The number wasn't small.
It was enough to freeze active accounts until it was addressed. Employees started asking questions.
Vendors stopped extending credit. And suddenly, the golden image Rhett had protected so fiercely began cracking in public. I called an all-staff meeting in the Mercer Street warehouse. No grand stage, no dramatic lighting.
Just folding chairs and transparency. I won't lie to you, I began. We're stabilizing after some serious mismanagement.
But no one here is losing their job because of pride.
That word landed.
Rhett stood in the back, arms crossed.
He didn't interrupt this time. He couldn't.
I laid out the restructuring timeline, new financial oversight, renegotiated contracts, outside auditing, scaled-back expansion.
No more ego projects. No more risky overleveraging.
When I finished, one of the site supervisors, a man who'd worked under my father for 22 years, raised his hand. Are we going to make it? Yes, I said without hesitation. If we work smarter. After the meeting, he approached me privately. Your dad would have respected what you're doing.
That almost broke me. Because respect was all I'd ever wanted.
Later that evening, I received a resignation email from Rhett.
Short. Cold. Defensive. He refused the role I'd offered.
Said he wouldn't serve under sabotage.
I didn't try to stop him.
Some people would rather burn the house down than admit they don't know how to fix it. And when he walked out of Callaway and Sons for the last time, the silence he left behind wasn't dramatic.
It was necessary. But the final confrontation hadn't happened yet. And it wasn't going to be with Rhett. It was going to be with her. A week after Rhett resigned,
My mother asked me to meet her at the office after hours. The Mercer Street building felt different at night, quieter, stripped of performance. Just brick, steel, and truth. She was standing in my father's old office, holding the framed photo of the groundbreaking ceremony from 30 years ago.
Dad in the center, Rhett at his side.
Me slightly behind them, smiling too wide, trying too hard.
"I failed you," she said without turning around. The words were so unexpected I didn't respond right away.
"I thought if I protected one child," she continued, "the company would stay strong. I didn't realize I was weakening the other."
I stepped closer but kept my distance.
"You didn't weaken me," I said. "You just forced me to build without you."
She finally faced me. There were no sharp edges in her expression anymore. Just exhaustion.
"When I whispered that at your rehearsal," she paused, swallowing.
"I was angry. Not at you. At myself. You didn't need us. And that terrified me."
That landed deeper than any insult she'd ever thrown. "For years," I said quietly, "I would have given anything to hear you say you were proud." She nodded once.
"I am. Simple. Late. But real."
We stood there in the office that once felt forbidden to me. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted.
"You don't fix it," I replied.
"You show up differently."
No dramatic embrace.
No cinematic reconciliation.
Just honesty. And for the first time in my life, she didn't whisper something to diminish me. She stood beside me in silence.
But healing doesn't erase consequences. Because legacy isn't just what you inherit. It's what you choose to rebuild. Legacy isn't just what you inherit. It's what you choose to rebuild. 6 months after that night in my father's office, Callaway and Sons reopened under the new structure. Thorne and Vale oversaw operations.
Contracts were honored. Employees stayed. Projects were stabilized.
The company's reputation, once teetering on collapse, began to rise again.
Rhett launched his own venture in another city.
He never returned to the headquarters, and my mother rarely mentions him anymore. Instead, she visits occasionally, walking through the halls I now manage, pausing to admire the murals my father commissioned, now restored with care and oversight. Gideon and I celebrated our first anniversary in the very building I had saved, not as a corporate trophy, but as a symbol of endurance. I walked through the lobby, touching the worn oak railings and polished floors, and realized that true power isn't about ownership. It's about presence, integrity, and the courage to claim your worth when everyone else doubts it. At the anniversary dinner, Gideon asked me if I ever regretted taking the hard road, if I regretted turning the company upside down to prove myself.
"No," I said. "Revenge wasn't about hurting anyone.
It was about proving to myself I was never the disappointment."
The irony was not lost on me.
The building my mother cherished, the company she idolized, and the legacy she had tried to hand solely to Rhett were all still ours. But now, the signature on every critical decision, every contract, every design plan, every future project, belonged to me. Seraphina Callaway Thorne. And the whispers that once tried to break me were replaced with respect, silent, undeniable, and earned. I hadn't just survived my family's favoritism and betrayal. I had rebuilt, reshaped, and reclaimed the story they thought they controlled. The building stood tall.
The employees thrived.
And I finally understood. Some legacies are inherited, but the greatest are chosen.